Howdy guys, I'm Aiden. Welcome back to the Archive channel, and you're watching the final Pokemon quiz attempt. The reason this is the final one is twofold. For one, even though I got all 1025 Pokemon in the race video I did with Zach, I wasn't very happy with my time. It was over 40 minutes, and I knew I could do better because I personally have done better. But that's just the smaller reason. The second and probably biggest reason is that doing these quiz videos isn't fun anymore. I mean, recording them is fine. It's just typing all of those Pokemon out for up to 34 minutes, sometimes 40 minutes back in the olden days, over and over and over again. Well, it gets a little boring, it gets a little stressful, and at a certain point, it's less about pure memorization and more about typing. And I'm not a great typer, I never have been. But the problem with not having a consistent typing form is that the more you do it, the more it hurts your wrist and your hands. I was trying to get a better time for this video specifically than one I was already proud of, and I spent the 22nd, the 23rd, and parts of the 24th literally doing this quiz and nothing else. It got so bad my wrist and hands actually started to hurt and I couldn't be at the computer no more. It's miserable. You think you can save 30 seconds or a minute, but the cost of that is attempt after attempt after attempt, and I could just be doing better things. So I finally gave it one more try last night and got this run that you're seeing here that I'm pretty proud of, so that's the one we're going with. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about process. For Generation 1, I always start with the starters, then the bugs, then the Pidgeline, Rattata, Raticate, Spearow, Fearow, all of those guys, and I typically do them really quickly. After that, I'll typically do the Nidoran line, so Nidoran, Nidorina, Nidoqueen, through Nidoking, all of them. And then I'll do Ekans Arbok and try to get the other poison types. So Zubat, Golbat, Tentacool, Tentacruel, Venonat, Venomoth, Grimer, Muck, Coughing, Wheezing. Then it's Sandshrew, Sandslash, along with the other rock and ground guys. So Cubone, Marowak, Diglett, Dugtrio, Geodude, Graveler, Golem, and Onix. Then the electric guys, there's only 3, so Pikachu, Raichu, Magnemite, Magneton, Voltorb, Electrode. The fire guys, Vulpix, Ninetales, Ponyta, Rapidash, Arcanine, Growlithe. Then there's kind of an early chunk that I grouped together of pink guys as well as Paris and Meowth. Just have all of them in one group for some reason. And then from there I go back to type. So Mankey, Primeape, Hitmonchan, Hitmonlee, Machop, Machoke, Machamp, all of those. The Psychic Boys, so Abra, Kadabra, Alakazam, Hypno, Drowsy. This is where I throw in Slowpoke and Slowbro, as well as Mr. Mime. Grass is pretty easy. You got Oddish, Gloom, Vileplume, Bellsprout, Weepinbell, Victory Bell, and then I'll throw in Tangela. You have a billion water type Pokemon in this generation, so if you're missing anybody, chances are it's a water type. So I'll do Poliwag, Poliwhirl, Poliwrath, Psyduck, Golduck, Staryu, Starmie, Seal Dugong, Shelter, Cloyster, Krabby, Kingler, Horsey, Seadra, Goldeen, Seaking, Magikarp, Gyarados, and get all of them. Now you see me doing Safari Zone, guys, so Doduo, Dodrio, Execute, Executor, Kangaskhan, Chansey, Tauros, Rhyhorn, Rhydon, and then if I hadn't gotten Tangela at this point, I will, or Porygon, Lapras, Ditto, Snorlax, all of those one-offs. There's only one dragon type, so get them. There's only one main ghost type, so we got them. Then it's the legendaries, the Eevees, the birds, the sort of elemental group of Electabuzz, Magmar, and Jinx, as well as the bugs, Pinsir and Scyther, and then the fossil guys, so Omnite, Amistar, Kabuto, and Kabutops. And that's Generation 1, which is fairly easy. Typically, I like to have it done within about 5 minutes. In this one, I got it under 4, which is pretty good. The time I'm shooting for is 33:58. That was my fastest attempt that I had done privately, and I felt like I could do a little bit better. So that's why the timer was set to 34 minutes. And in order to kind of hit that 33:58 mark, I have to get around 30 Pokemon per minute. So one Pokemon every 2 seconds or so, which is pretty miserable. And keep in mind, that's just to match my time. If I want to do better, then presumably I have to get around 31, 32 per minute. So you can kind of keep track with that and do the math if you want. Basically, an easier way to look at it is for the bigger generations like Kanto, Hoenn, Unova, and Paldea, it's around under 5 minutes for sure. And then for the quicker ones like Johto, Sinnoh, Kalos, as well as the Hisui, Mega Evolution, and Unknowns. Those you try to do in under 3 or so, give or take, right? Obviously, it depends. Some are slightly bigger, some are slightly longer, whatever. Back to Generation 2, though, we got the starters, Sentret Furret, Hoot Hoot, and Noctowl, and I also do Natu Zatu just because they're birds. For the bugs, Ladybug, Ladian, Spinarak, Ariados, and then Pineco Fortress, Scizor, Heracross. Get all of them down. There's like 3 water blue guys, so they're pretty easy to remember. Lantern, Chinchou, Marill, Azumarill, Wooper, Quagsire, and then I also usually just throw in Wobbuffet because they're fun. Togepi, Togetic, I do with Sunkern, Sunflora, as well as the other grass, Hoppip, Skiploom, and Jumpluff, and then Unknown for some reason. Don't ask me why. Then I have a group of S Pokemon, so Sudowoodo, Stantler, Smeargle, Shuckle, and then I throw in Swinub, Piloswine, Slugma, Macargo, and Skarmory. The Gen 1, like evolutions and babies, are kind of difficult. The babies are at least lined up with each other, so Smoochum, Elekid, Magby, and even Tyrogue are near each other, as well as Pichu, Cleffa, Igglybuff, and if you don't remember Togepi, that's another great way to get it, for sure. But the evolutions are strewn everywhere. So you have Crobat up at the very top, then you kind of have Blossom and Politoed, Steelix, Kingdra, Slowking is a pretty easy one to forget, Porygon 2 is a pretty easy one to forget. You got Blissey, and then Hitmontop as always, which is difficult. Then I have a bunch of one-offs that I kind of group together for whatever reason or another. Murkrow, Mischievous, Aipom, and Yanma are part of a group. And I know when I do Murkrow, then I can do Teddiursa, Ursaring, Snubbull, Granbull, which is pretty easy. Then I have a group of 4 one-offs that are just, I don't know, weird. Girafarig, Dunsparce, Cursula, and Quillfish. They all have later evolutions, I think is the main reason why. And then down at the bottom, we have the Beast, Tyranitar, and the 3 legendaries. Don't forget Miltank. And don't forget that little stretch of water Pokemon. Starting at Corsola, you get Remoraid, Octillery, and Mantine. I just remember usually to throw Delibird in there based on positioning. And then finally, just as a check of like the guys that I actually like in this generation, I have grouped together. So Mareep, Flaffy, Ampharos, Wooper, Quagsire, Houndour, Houndoom, Donphan, Fanfy, get all of them. So yeah, that's Generation 2. One that I used to have problems with, but have since gotten a lot better at. Generation 3, my favorite, because the Pokedex is lined up pretty well based on where they're located at. Typically in this one, I go slightly out of order after I do the starters, Poochyena, Mightyena, Zigzagoon, and Lanoon, and typically the bugs. I'll go kind of middle of the decks to get a lot of the one-offs. Azurill, Nosepass, Roselia, Torkoal, Spinda and Spoink sound similar, and they're right next to each other, so I add them up. And then Swablu and Altaria, I know right after them are a lot of one-offs. So Zangoose, Seviper, Solrock, Lunatone, go ahead and get all of them. Delcatty and Skitty I have a hard time remembering, so I typically do them. And then Sableye, Mawile, 2 one-offs that are next to each other, which is kind of lit. I'm filling out the sort of electric route that kind of leads into Mauville. So Electrike, Manectric, Plusle, Minoon, Volbeat, Illumise, Roselia, Gulpin, Swolot. And that kind of leads to the Magma and Aqua guys. So Carvanha, Sharpedo, Wailmer, Wailord, Numel, and Camerupt, which is pretty easy. Back up top, your sort of Petalburg Wood guys. So Lotad, Lombre, Ludicolo, Seedot, Nuzleaf, and Shiftry. The 2 birds, Taillow and Swellow, Wingull and Pelipper. And more guys leading toward Petalburg Wood. So Ralts, Kirlia, Gardevoir, Surskit, and Masquerain. You also have the other bugs like Nincada, Ninjask, and Shed Ninja, which is pretty nice. Whismur, Loudred, Exploud, and then the fighting guys. So Makahita, Hariyama, Meditite, Medicham. Usually after I get done with Spinda, I know it's Desert Boys. So Trapinch for Brava, Flygon, Cacnea, Cacturn, Claydol, Baltoy. And when I do Baltoy, I know I'm near the fossils, the Leap Cradilly, Anorith, Armaldo. Then I kind of have a trio of Water Boys that are mostly next to each other. So Barboach, Wishcash, Cortfish, Crawdaunt, Melodic, Feebas, get all of them. Wynot is also part of that group of one-offs I forgot to mention earlier. The Ice guys are next to the Dive guys, so you can get Snorunt, Glalie, Spheal, Celio, Walrein, Clamperl, Lovedisc, Relicanth, Gorbis, Huntail, all of them. And then sort of above that row, you can kind of see it's mostly like one-offs and the ghost types. So Shuppet, Banette, Duskull, Dusclops, and then the one-offs of Castform, Chimecho, 2 Cs. Absol and Tropius are kind of near Fortree City, as well as Kecleon, so that's typically how I remember him. Then you have the pseudos, which are usually at the bottom. You'll notice Dragonite's been there, Tyranitar's been there. Generation 2 has 3, so Salamence, the Metagross line. And then from there, it's legendaries, so the Regis, Latios, Kyogre, Groudon, Rayquaza, Jirachi, and Deoxys, and we're done, baby. We're moving on. 23 minutes. Sinnoh is one that I've gotten insanely cracked at just from doing a lot. It's another fairly easy one with not a lot of Pokemon, with the caveat being that I think the one-offs, again, similar to Generation 2, are a little bit annoying, but I've since memorized them. You do the starters, you do the main bird, you do the main rodent. You'll notice these guys are usually at the start of every dex. So in Generation 1, it's the Pidgey line, then Rattata Raticate. Generation 2, Sentret Furret, then Hoot Noctowl. Generation 3, Tailo and Swellow are a little bit lower, but the rodent is still right up top. Same thing here. There's also a trend that I've talked about in these quiz videos where there's usually a dog or a cat that you have to keep track of. Generation 1, you got Meowth Persian. Gen 2 is Granbull and Snubbull. Gen 3, Skitty Delcatty. And then in Gen 4, it's Glameow and Purugly, which is helpful too because then it leads into all of the other Team Galactic Pokemon. So yeah, that's just a little tip to keep in mind to look out for all the dogs and the cats. Anyway, back to Generation 4. After you get Bidoof, Barrel, you got Kricketot, Kricketune, Shinx, Luxio, Luxray, and then you got to keep in mind of all the weird grass and bug guys that are near the start. There are kind of 3, 4 really that I look out for. Badoo, Roserade, Combi, Vespiquen, Cherrim, Cherubi, and then the Burmy line. And then for whatever reason, the fossils are up there. So Cranidos, Rampardos, Shieldon, and Bastiodon. Then keep in mind of the water guys. So Weasel, Floatzel, Shellos, Gastrodon. Then I go down a little bit, get Finneon and Lumineon. And then Lumineon, for whatever reason in my head, kind of sounds like Leafeon, Glaceon. So I usually get them here along with Rotom. We'll get back to why in a second. Then I get 3 guys that get Mega Evolutions. That's how I remember them. So Snover, Abomasnow, Riolu, Lucario, Lopunny, and Baneri. The reason we put Rotom there is that it lets me know we're at the end of the evolutions and fixing to go into the legendaries. Having Snover and Abomasnow lets me know that we're at the evolution part. So I kind of have that section completely mapped out. Getting Glaceon and Leafeon early helps me kind of get rid of them because I don't typically think of them in this group, so that's nice. Anyway, back to the earlier part of the decks, there's a lot of goofy one-offs that I have in trios. The first trio is Pachirisu, Spiritomb, and Chatot, sort of the original group. Then you have 2 groups of babies. The first one is near each other, so Bonsly, Happiny, and Mime Jr. The other is more scattered out and harder to remember. Munchlax, Mantike, and Chingling, all in different spots. Then there are evolutions that for whatever reason are not near the bottom. Ambipom, Mismagius, and Honchkrow. Remember earlier I typed in Johto of having Misdreavus, Murkrow, and Yanma? I do the same thing here, so Mismagius, Honchkrow, and Yanmega. For the evolutions, a lot of them are in groups, which is nice. So Generation 1, you have Magnezone, Licky, Rhyperior, Tangrowth, Electivire, Magmortar. Then you kind of go into 2, with the exception of Weavile, who's at the start for some reason. But you have Weavile, Togekiss, Yanmega, Gliscor, Mamoswine, and Porygon, who for whatever reason should be at the start. Then all the Generation 3 ones are near the end. So Gallade, Probopass, Dusknoir, and Frostlass. Then the legendaries, which we talked about earlier. And then you see that kind of top row above the evolutions is Safari Zone. Hippowdon, Scroopy, Drappy, and Krogunk, and Toxicroak, with one missing, and that guy is Carnivine. I usually type him in when I do the pseudo, which is Garchomp, who isn't at the bottom of the decks, but I forgot to type him and then missed him, and then I'm like, what the hell's that last guy? Oh well, we're moving on. So I go over to Generation 5 instead. Not ideal, but hopefully we'll come back to it and remember it. All right, Unova time. This is a big ass dex, and similar to Generation 1, I have my weird way of going about it. We start with Victini as well as the starters. Getting Patrat and Watchog early is fine. Purloin and Liepard's fine. The monkeys, getting all of them is pretty good. However, I don't do the dog yet because it connects to the grass types. So in typing in Lillipup, I can type in Lilligant, which sounds familiar, which then can lead me to Petalil, Cottonee, Whimsicott, the Leavanny line. Then I also get the Bug, Venipede, Scolipede, Whirlipede, all of them. Then I do Mincino, Cincino, Audino, kind of normal guys. and then some of the weird water ones, so Basculin, Frillish, and Jellicent. I have my group at the bottom that I call the Denku 4 that also similarly relate to those grass Pokemon, so that's usually where I go get Ferroseed, Ferrothorn, Fungus, Amoonguss. Then I do LGM, Behem, Meanfu, Meanshao. The reason they're kind of the Denku 4 is because they're Pokemon Denku use a lot, and they happen to be ones that I forget normally, so isn't that nice? I always try to save Meanfu and Meanshao last, because I know when I do them, it can lead me into the fighting Pokemon, most of which are at the top half. Throw, Sock, Scraggy, Scrafty, Girder, Timber, Conkeldurr, all of them. And then I'm thinking, okay, that's kind of the Machamp equivalent in Generation 1. Let's get the Geodude equivalent. So Boldore, Roggenrola, Gigalith, all of them. And then toward the top, I also have like a group of pairs that I try to remember. So Munna, Musharna, Woobat and Swoobat, and Thwebble Crustle. You can see I don't have Swoobat Woobat right now, and we're going to come back to that. I'm filling out the Desert Boys, Sandile, Krokorok, Crocodile, Darumaka, Darmanitan, and Maractus. Typically when I do this also, I'll throw in Sigilyph, Yamask, and Cophagrigus, and then that usually leads to Cryogonal, Beartic, Cubchoo, which means I can then lead into the other Ice Guy, Vanillish and Vanillix and all of them, which then leads into the inanimate objects, Clink, Clang, Garbodor, and Trubbish. If I haven't gotten the Electric Boys, I'll do that. So Blitzel, Zebstrika, Emolga is always the first three. Then get the Electros line, and then try to end out with Joltik and Galvantula, because that way I can go into the other bugs. So Karrablast, Escavalier, Shelmet, Acelgor, Larvesta, and Volcarona. The bottom of this Pokedex is a complete mess, but it is broken up by types. So at this point, getting the bugs is nice. Getting the one-offs like Bouffalant, Heatmore, Durant, Stunfisk, and Alomomola in a group. Then you have sort of the dark and ghost types that I have linked together. Bisharp, Pawniard, Golett, Golurk. This is where I get the Chandelure line, and then it leads into the two psychics that are near each other. So Gothita, Gothitelle, Solosis, Reuniclus, all of those guys. You have dragons near the bottom, Druddigon, Axew, Fracture, Haxorus, Dino, as well as Hydreigon. Get all of them. Then don't forget the fossils. So you have Archon, Archeops, Tortuga, and Caracosta, which is cool. At the bottom, once you get past Volcarona, it's typically legendaries from there. So the dragons, Meloetta, Keldeo, and Genesect is sort of your one-offs. Then you get the genies, as well as the Swords of Justice, which doesn't take long. Drillbur and Excadrill are kind of in that duos group. I forgot to add them earlier, so I'm sorry. And I also forgot to add Zorua and Zoroark, which is near that dark group that I talked about earlier, which is pretty nice. Deerling and Sawsbuck, for whatever reason, I'd be forgetting these guys a lot. I should lump them in with the grass guys, and sometimes I do, but then sometimes I end up doing it with the Denku 4, and then sometimes I forget about both, and it screws me over. Last but not least, we should talk about the birds. So when I do Tranquil and all of that, then I do Swanna, Ducklet, and then that group at the bottom that you see of Rufflet, Braviary, Volibee, and Mandibuzz. Get all the flyings together. All right, so that's it. Moving on to Generation 6. This is the easiest one. There's just not many Pokemon, and they're lined up really nice for you. I always do Heliolisk and Helioptile, mainly because I forget about them often, so I always start with them. Then I go the water guys, Inkay, Malamar, Binnacle, Barbaracle, Skrelp, Dragalge, Clawitzer, and Clauncher. Then we're doing the early boys, so your rodent and your bird, your main bug, and for whatever reason, the starters give me trouble because each line has a guy that I have trouble spelling. In the Chespin line, it's Quilladin because of the two L's. In the Finnegan line, it's Braixen because you have to type B-R-A-I, which screws me over. And for the Froakie line, it's Frogadier. I don't know why, I always mess up the spelling on that. Now I'm getting the trios because there's very few trio lines. Most of them are duos. So Floette, Flabebe, Florges, Goomy, Sliggoo, Goodra, Honedge, Doublade, and Aegislash. And then remember our dog and cat rule. Well, you got both in this case. So Furfuroo is your dog, then Esper, Meowstic, Pyroar, Litleo, all of them. Skidoo and Go-Go, Pancham, Pangoro, I forget all the time. Thankfully, they're next to each other, so if I get one, the other shows up fairly easy. Then you have kind of the Fairy 4, Spritzy, Aromatisse, Swirlix, and Slurpuff. The fossils are next to each other: Tyrant, Tyrantrum, Amora, Aurorus. And then toward the bottom, I know it's a dragon, it's an ice type, and it's 2 ghost lines. So Phantom, Trevenant, Pumpkaboo, Gorgeist. The legendaries, there's not many of them. So you get Life and Death Trio, Diancie. Now is a good time to type in Carbink because they look so similar. Then Hoopa and Volcanion. And then there's very few one-offs. So Sylveon, Hawlucha, Dedenne, and Carbink are all next to each other. Now all you have to do is remember Klefki, who for whatever reason is next to Goodra, and you're good to go. Off to Alola. This was definitely one of my weaker ones in previous attempts, but I have gotten better at it. You start sort of, again, with the starters, as always. Then the Rodent, Gumshoe, Yungoos. Then the Bird, Pickieback, Trumbeak, and Toucannon, which is pretty cool. And then the Bug. I always have trouble spelling Charjabug every time, man. It kills me. Oh, but it looks like in this run, I'm not even bothering with the Alola because I want to do these side areas. Yeah, usually, because of the race, I wanted to get good at doing this in order, so one generation at a time, not moving ahead. However, now that that's ended, I can kind of go back to typing them in any order. And while I do think going in order is faster, there are a few cases where I want to deviate. This is one of them. Getting the Hisui guys early kind of puts them out of mind. There's not many you have to remember other than like Weirdeer, Cleavor, Ursaluna, and Enamorus. The rest of them, you just kind of look at what's around. Like, oh, I wonder who evolves from Masculine and Sneasel and Quillfish, and you just type them in pretty easily. Paldea Expeditions is one that I would actually recommend saving toward the end because a lot of them are reliant on Galar Pokemon like Dipplin and Hydrapple, Archelodon, and Sinistcha and Poltergeist. If you get the Gen 8 guys, then you can get these guys pretty easy. Here I had to do it vice versa, where I got Dipplin, Hydrapple, then the Aquan line. Sinistcha and Poltergeist, then the Sinistea line, all of that. Outside of that, you have the Beast, Walking Weight, Gouging Fire, Raging Bolt, the Swords of Justice, Iron Leaves, Iron Crown, Iron Boulder, the sort of weird Poison Chain guys, so Monkey Dory, Okidoki, Pheasantipity, Ogerpon is part of that DLC, and then Terapagos and Pecharunt near the end. Not too bad, doesn't take much time. Anyway, now that that side quest has ended, I can actually go back to talking about the Alola boys. So I have sort of a crab and spider connection that I usually do here of Crabrawler, Crabominable, Dewpider, Araquanid, and then I typically throw in Beware and Stuffle. I remember Rockruck and Lycanroc alongside Palossand and Sandygast. Don't ask why. Then I know there's the one fire guy, so Salazzle and Salandit next to Marowak, the ground guy, Mudbray, and Mudsdale. There's 3 grasses, which is nice. So Fomantis, Lurantis, Bounsweet, Stinny, Starina, and then Shiinotic and Morlul. Then I'll typically do the water boys, so Marini, Toxapex, Wishy-Washy, but then I also have to remember Golisopod and Wimpod, which I throw together in that group fairly easy. The one-offs in Generation 7 are also pretty tough. I imagine that's what's going to screw you over. Here's how I do them. Comfey, I try to get with Rabombi and Cutiefly, given that they're all fairies. Pyukumuku, Oricorio, and Bruxish I have as like a bird and fish group, and that comes in handy later on when we get to Generation 8. Drampa and Delmise both start with D. I believe they also both got Megas recently. Minior, Komala, and Turtonator are all next to each other, and then you get the 2 Pikachu clones of Mimikyu and Togedemaru, which take no time. Type Null and Savali, part of a group next to Zyard, and then the Monkeys, Oranguru, and Passimian, also part of a group. Once you get the pseudo-legendary, it's all just mythicals, legendaries, and ultra beasts. So typically, I'll do Cosmog, Cosmoem, Solgaleo, Lunala, Necrozma, then do the Tapus, Coco, Lele, Finny, and Bulu, then the mythicals, Marshadow, Magearna, and Zeraora. In this case, after doing Zeraora, I'm like, I should get the other Z guys. This probably was a waste of time, but we go Zacian, Samazenta, Zarude, Eternatus, and then I just get the rest of them. So Regieleki, Regidrago, Calyrex, Spectrier, Glastrier, Cubfu, and Urshifu. Damn, that's a lot of legendaries. But what are you going to do? Then we go back and get Melmetal and Meltan and Unknown, and then from here it's just Ultra Beasts. I do the Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon group. Poipole, Naganadel, Stakataka, Blacephalon, they're all next to each other. And then the regular group, I got Nihilego and Pheromosa because I view them as the feminine ones. Buzzwole and Guzzlord are the male ones. And then the goofy ass ones, Xurkitree, Gartana, and Celesteela are usually my last 3. Yeah, that's pretty much it on now to Generation 8. Scorbunny, Reboot, Cinderace, Sobble, Drizzly. Drizzly, for whatever reason, the spelling on that usually screws me up, but I did okay. Then Grookey, Thwackey, Rillaboom, get all of them. And there's a lot of the front of this dex I have memorized in sort of an interesting way of Skwovet, Greedent, Dubwool, Wooloo. Then you get the board, Coruscant, Corviknight, Rookidee, Yamper, Boltund, and Choodle Dreadnought are next to each other, so I remember them that way. Blipbug, Dottler, and Orbeetle are the bug. And then typically I do Thievul, Nickit, Gossifleur, and Eldegoss, not because there's anything common with them, but just because I think they're the hardest to remember up top, so they're saved for last usually, which is pretty cool. Then Generation 8, the way to do this, I think, is to try and get all the Gigantamax guys and group them that way. Milcery, Alcremie, Roly-Coly, Colossal, Carkol, all of them, which then goes into Slislipede and Cinescorch, because they're both fire types, which is nice. You can get the Grimmsnarl line as well as the Hatterene line, not only because they're next to each other, similar to like a Gothitelle Reuniclus situation, but again, they're both Gigantamaxes, which is cool. Then if you've been doing all the other Pokedexes up until this point, you'll have a lot of these one-off gaps that are just evolutions. So Obstagoon, Berserker, Cursula, Surfetched, Mr. Rhyme, and then I usually type Snom and Frostmoth just because they're ice. Then Runigris and all of them. If you remember, I was talking about the bird and fish group in Generation 7. Generation 8 has similar guys that are also one-offs, so I just reuse it. So in this case, it's Cramorant and Pincurchin, which is similar to sort of Pukumuku and Oricorio. Then I do Phalanx, and then there's one-offs after Darmanitan 4 in a row. Ice-Q is easy because the ice guys, Indeedee and Morpeko look similar, and then it's just a matter of typing in Stonejourner right, which is hard because his spelling sucks. Cramorant also has guys that I tend to forget a lot. Silicobra and Sandaconda at least have a Gigantamax, but Arrokuda and Barraskewda I forget this time around, and we're going to have to come back to later, which sucks. Cufant and Copperaja lets me know that we're pretty much at the end. Then we have the fossils, Dracovish, Arctovish, Dracozolt, Arctozolt, I type them out that way. Then Dreepy, Dracloak, and Dragapult, and we already got the legendaries, so isn't that nice? Now I'm going to stare at my screen and be like, who's left, who's left? We'll come back to it later. That's the thing, even when you have a goated run like this, you can always technically do better, and I got to get that out of my head because going back to it and doing better is dangerous. You spend so much time. Finally, Paldea, easily the section that I was the worst at during the race because it was the newest to me and I hadn't really learned it a whole lot. Now I've done a lot better. You do the starters and the bugs. Shout out my man Tarantula, whose spelling screwed me over on so many runs. Spidops is thankfully easier. Low kick's nimble. The Pomo line is sort of your titular rodent, or maybe you count Lechonk and Winkalonge on there. I don't. I have them grouped with Mousehold and Tandemouse, another potential rodent. I don't know, there's so many weird little normal guys. It's odd. But then we have the grass, Smoliv, Dolive, and Arboliva. Squawkabilly I type here, and then get sort of the Titan Pokemon. So Bombirdier, Cloth, Orthworm, and then I typically throw Flamigo in here. Then I get Veluza, just because that Pokemon is hard to remember. And then I go other waters, so Palafin, Finizen, Dondozo, Tatsugiri. Glibbit Glamora is hard to remember unless you've played through the games a lot. Orthworm kind of looks like tires, so it reminds me of all the kind of transportation-themed Pokemon. Cyclizar, Varoom, Reveroom, get all of them together. Then I know there's a section of gray, usually with Veluza. So that's Cetitan, Citadel, and then if you go a little bit forward, Annihilate, which is cool. Then you have a group of just sort of like evolutions, but technically not Paradox Pokemon. So Wooper and Clodsire, Dunsparce and Girafarig. We remember we grouped them in Gen 2, so that's easier to remember. Kingambit is a little bit separate. And then for the Paradox guys, There are certain pairs that I do. Great Tusk and Iron Treads, Slitherwing and Iron Moth, Roaring Moon and Iron Valiant are next to each other, which is nice. Then the Tablets of Ruin quadruplet. I don't know what the fuck they're called. I'll be honest with you. But it's Chien-Pao, Ting-Lu, Chi-Yu, and then I forget Wo-Chi in here, which is great. It's going to screw me over later. Gimmighoul and Goldingo are down here because they're Pokemon 1000. Otherwise, I feel like they would be a lot higher up in the Pokedex. Then you get sort of the pseudo with Baxcalibur. Then we sort of go back to the Paradox guys. Iron Jugulus and Iron Thorns are easy to remember together because they're pseudos. Sandy Shocks and Iron Hands kind of have a metal electricity theme, which is easy. Screamtail, Fluttermane, and Slitherwing all have similar-esque names. Iron Bundle is just funny. I usually type him with Iron Treads. And the one that we're missing there is Brute Bonnet. Now we have what I like to call a series of pink Pokemon. So Rellor, Rabsca, Espathra, Flittle, then the Tinkatink line, and then you'll have Wiglet and Wugtrio that leads into Bombirdier, which is cool. Typically though, when I'm typing in Tinkaton, I remember another trio in Knackle, Knacklestack, and Garganackle. Why do I have the two linked together? I don't know. This one makes a little bit more sense though. The Fire Guys, Charcadet, Armarouge, Ceruledge, and then Capsakid and Scovillain, all because they're fire. Bellibolt, Tadbulb, Wattrel, and Kilowattrel is pretty easy because they're electrics. The Grass Guys are near each other, so Toadstool, Bramblin, and Brambleghast are all kind of close by, which is very nice. And then there's some normal boys. So Tauros is sort of my hint to this, but that's typically where I put Shroodle and Grafaiai. And remember our dog and cat rule? Well, the cat's pretty easy because it's the starter, but believe it or not, there are 3 dog lines in this generation. So Greavard, Houndstone, Mastiff, Mabostiff, Fido, and Dachshbun, whose spelling always screws me over. I gotta remember C before S. So D-A-C-H-S Bun. Type it in that way. And at this point, I remember Airoscuda and Bearscuda, all those goofballs. And now, with about 2 minutes, most of my typing's done. I could have got this in 32 on the dot, but instead I'm having to remember Carnivine, Wo-Chien, and Brute Bonnet, which thankfully doesn't take that much longer. But yeah, that's the end of this quiz series. I hope you guys enjoyed these videos, and I'm excited for whatever my next hyper obsession might be. I've been Aiden, and I hope you enjoyed the video. All right, bye-bye, everybody.